World, the universe, the multiverse. Writing on air.
So, good afternoon and welcome to Writing on Air, the third day of Writing on Air 2024. It's been a fabulous day already and we just heard a brilliant concert. It was fantastic. Do come to their longer gig on the 14th of December. That's a Saturday evening, isn't it? A Saturday night, it's all right, in a few weeks' time. So do come to that, it'll be fantastic. So now we've got a discussion, and it will be a discussion open to the audience. We've got four fantastic panellists here and a chairperson, Vicky Orton, who's going to lead this really important discussion. She's going to tell you about that. Please put your hands together for our wonderful panellists here and get well soon.
Thank you, Peter. And I feel really honoured to be hosting this discussion because, to be honest, it's an important topic and it's one that you don't hear discussed very much. Certainly, I've never come across a panel on the mainstream media, for want of a better word, that includes all people with disabilities discussing disability. And this idea was actually Rachel, who's on the panel. So thank you, Rachel, for coming up with this. So get well soon. For people with disabilities and chronic illness, the concept of recovery is difficult to navigate. A diagnosis can present us with a new normal or make us see the past in a new light. But in reality, who decides what disability and recovery look like? And when our journeys don't completely fit, what then? And that's what we're going to be discussing today. I mean, it's very timely because 28% of the population have a disability, according to the Office for National Statistics and Scope, and that number is rising. And that number is only taken from the people that identify as having a disability when asked. So there are obviously a lot of other people that the statistics don't capture. And with the increase in people who have long-term COVID, then the statistics are rising all the time, and the mental health crisis that young people are facing as well. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our panel. So DB, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Wheels that doesn't talk. Hello, my name is DB. I have a music group and I also write stories. I like fighting for disability right. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, DB. And then Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Rachel, and I'm a girl in the mid-30s, trying to figure out what being an adult is, and I work as an activist for Leeds Citizens, which is an activism group on several issues that matter in the Leeds community.
Thank you, Rachel. And James, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is James Lewis Moran. I am an autistic adult, and I'm trying to navigate what that means. What does that look like? I am not your kid. As often is said about autistic kids, you're not like my kid.
And my name is Vicky Orton, and yes, I'm a wheelchair user, getting increasingly frustrated with the lack of disability rights and the lack of the power of the Equality Act, but I also like to challenge that in a positive way by raising awareness through a lot of the artwork that I do, talking to other groups, a lot of the stories that I tell as well. So it's not all negative, you know. This is a discussion, and it will be, very enlightening, I hope. So the first question is, how do concepts of getting better and normality affect our sense of self with chronic illness or neurodiversity? And it's a really difficult question if you know that, I have a condition where I feel like I've got the sword of Damocles hanging over me. I never know if it's going to be stable, if it's going to deteriorate, when it will deteriorate, how it will deteriorate. And the word normality is something that I think about a lot. DB, what are your thoughts on this?
Who gets to decide what well looks like? David Boys, what does well look like? What does normal look like? What does disabilities look like? I cannot believe we still live in a world where we must fight for our rights and freedom. In this speech I will be talking about why people assume disabled people are unwell, how the media and government attitudes result in the way people have a stigma around disabled people being sick. Why is it down to doctors and medical professionals to determine if we are disabled? When you're labeled as having a disability, some people assume that you are sick and incapable of everything. The people who genuinely believe we are different and incapable of doing something due to our impairments are narrow-minded and insecure. We are not that different from you. Don't let our physical and/or mental impairments throw you off. You and I are all the same. I'm a person too. People may also think less of you if you identify as disabled because they have negative views of disabled people themselves. This can include general discomfort and embarrassment, low expectations, and sometimes a very deep and intense fear of someday becoming disabled themselves. Paul rank ND. Having a disability should not give you any less of a disadvantage compared to someone without a disability. But we still face several barriers every day, such as having a lack of physical infrastructure that is not accessible. An example of this is I am a wheelchair user. I can't express enough how much it frustrates me that there are that many stairs but no alternatives such as a ramp for me to access some public spaces. There should be more lifts and ramps in the community. All places should include alternative access for wheelchairs. And old places with steps should be modernized to include ramps. If they are not able to change, then bring on a war. I shall bring down the buildings to pieces until you start to listen. We are not asking for much. We are asking for equality. Just our basic human rights to access any building or place. If you don't, then we shall fight you. If you're not with us, you're against. Trust me when I say you do not want to be against us. Scope.org has done recent research in which they found 3 out of 4 disabled people, 72%, have experienced negative attitudes or behavior in the last 5 years. Scope ND negative attitudes tend to mainly come from the public transport, and the benefit assessors. 30% of disabled people looking for education or training said they avoided doing so because of the attitudes they had experienced. Disabled people try to avoid health and social care settings due to experiencing negative attitudes, again linking to why I'm writing this. Health professionals again think we are all unwell because we have a disability. Having a hospital point of view is not correct. Why believe the hospital's side of things? Employees discriminate against disabilities believing they are inadequate and not capable of doing a job. If you are someone who thinks we are all vegetables, then you know nothing about us. This isn't about everyone, but unfortunately, a huge number of people still feel and think this way. All doctors try to do is fix us when we do not need to be fixed. We are not broken. Persons with disabilities are seldom covered in the media, and when they are featured, they are often negatively stereotyped and not appropriately represented. United Nations, 2019. All media should only portray persons with disabilities in a manner consistent with a respect for human rights. United Nations, 2019. The media is against disabilities. The media likes us to be pitied so they can gain money in their pockets. They don't care about our feelings. All they care about is making themselves rich. I call this pity porn. To conclude, who does get to decide what well looks like? It should not be the media who pity us, or the medical professionals who do not understand us. It should not be the employers who constantly underestimate us. We should get to decide if we are well. We should decide whether we want to be independent or if we want varying levels of support. I get to decide my own narrative, and I have decided that I am well. Who gets to decide what well looks like? David Boys, what does well look like? Who gets to decide?
Thank you, DB. There's an awful lot in there, and it covers a lot of interesting questions. But before I go back and respond to you, I'm just going to ask Rebecca and James. Rachel, sorry. Rachel.
I will answer to everything.
So sorry, Rachel. Oh dear, it's been a long day. I'm really sorry about that. So, Rachel, how do you deal with the concept of getting better and what normality is, and how does it affect your sense of self?
Well, I found that wrong in the concept of disability, particularly in regards to me, but my feelings of wellness, my feelings of capability fluctuate.
Yeah.
Depending on outside factors and inside factors. I think we sometimes are harshest critic, but we do a very human thing of comparing ourselves to other people in regards to milestones, and I think every human being is guilty of this. We all have our bad days and our good days, and we all have days where the inner critic sometimes takes over, and I think we're just starting to, as a society, realise that we need to be kinder and be kinder in how we talk to ourselves. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Again, there's a lot that's going on, and a lot of the issues that you're talking about affect everybody. You know, it's not just disabled people, which reflects what DB is saying, is actually, which is the same as you. You know, we're all people with good days and bad days, and extra barriers to fight against. But at the end of the day, I think we can be especially harsh on ourselves, and I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Especially I find the concept of being a burden or difficult, hard to get around my head, hard to get over, and I'm not proud of that.
Yeah. So I'll just go on to James and then get back to you, because there's lots of things to discuss here. So James.
Yeah, well, getting well and sense of self when you are a disabled person is a strange feeling. It's a bit of a paradox almost. It's like my baseline health is a lifelong condition where the sensory input of the world is just brighter to me. Sounds are louder, lights are stronger, so forth and so forth. So are you healed yet is one thing people will say to disabled people, and I'm like, there is no cure for autism. It's the way you are born. It is the fundamental wiring of your brain. And yet some people will act as if it's just a cold you can get over. That annoys me. Getting well, what does that look like? Having support around you, the support that you need to live, say, independently. But then that doesn't mean all your barriers or your struggles disappear because you've got benefits, for instance. You still struggle, you still need support. So getting well, I suppose, is living in a way that you are comfortable with and that works for your disability.
Yeah. So in terms of the get well, I think you're right in that, you know, there are days when presumably for all of us, we have good days, we have bad days, and then days when we feel well. And I guess for a lot of us, well, our definition of being well might be a different definition of other people's being well. And like Rachel was saying about meeting milestones and things like that, and how other people view you. And it was interesting, James, that you're talking about people suggesting cures and things when, you know, where medical science hasn't managed to find, you know, a magic pill. And the other question is, and I'll ask you, how would you feel about if there was a so-called cure for your condition? Would you take that cure, or do you feel that you are fundamentally shaped by your disability? So, DB, I'll ask you, and then I should explain that we'll come back to DB because DB's communicating via several devices, so I'd like to give DB time to put together an answer. And so, Rachel, how about
Who gets to decide what well looks like?
Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, so if there was a magic pill that you could take that would banish your disability, would you take that, or do you feel that your disability shapes the person that you are?
First of all, that question will never be asked of a person, a BME person.
No, I was picking up on James's point, you know, when people are saying, have you tried this, that and the other to make you well?
Well, my disability is kind of as fundamental as someone else's race to my identity.
Yeah.
So that would be quite equivalent to me asking someone from the BAME community if there was a pill to change even the ethnicity, would you change it?
Yeah, so, which again, I think what you're saying is one of the things that I feel quite strongly around the, think of a tactful word of the way that people with disabilities are often excluded from venues, from groups and things like that. But you wouldn't exclude anybody on the grounds of their colour or ethnicity. But there are so many places that will say, we welcome everyone, and then there's a flight of steps there. Or it's so noisy when you go in, the sensory overload is just, you know, literally disabling. So in fact, they don't welcome everybody, which reflects what you're saying, you know, so to ask the question, you know, would you take a pill if you could to make you better? But everybody, I'm sure, might have a different response to that. So, James, as you raise the topic of, you know...
It's a funny thing, the idea of cures, and everybody wants to live a life without ailments, without pain, and so yeah, I can see the appeal of that. But in my experience, the way I see the world through my disability is who I am. I wouldn't express conversations the way I would. I wouldn't see problems that other people would ignore. It is the lens I view the world with. There is no escaping that. And I think I would not be the same person if I was not autistic.
DB, you were talking about the pity aspect of people with disabilities, that often other people want to pity you and feel sorry for you, but actually have no understanding of your everyday life and what you achieve and what you do. I'll just say...
So, Vicky.
Sorry, Stevie.
Vicky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. TB use a special device for talking. So he just wants me to say he don't want anybody to change him, and he likes the way he is, and it's perfect that way. So everybody has the way they are, and with the way he is just how he is, which makes everybody equal.
Yeah, yeah. Can I just ask members of the audience, so I know there are some people in the audience with and without hidden disabilities, various disabilities. So is there anybody who would like to comment on how they see the concept of getting better, and how do you judge what normal is?
Vicky, do you want to, before... oh, here.
Hiya. My name's Steve. I suppose I've got a hidden disability. I'm visually impaired, and I have been all my life. It's a very interesting discussion. I think just to address that question very specifically, and then I want to just comment on something else as well. Yeah, how do you judge? It's in the eye of the beholder, really, isn't it? A little bit. You know, and what does getting better mean? It means lots of things to different people. I think getting better, for me, means coming to terms with where you are and what you've got, what the cards you're being dealt, and getting on with your life, and just sounds trite to say it, dealing with it, because everybody's different and people deal with things in different ways. But I think actually trying to live as normal a life as you can. I don't actually see myself as being a disabled person. I see myself as being a person first and foremost who just happens to have a disability that limits me in certain things that I do. I think just going back to some of the discussion that's taken place, I think one of the things that I've certainly found out in my life really is that what we've got to do is to educate and influence people, okay, and particularly decision makers. I think that's the thing. People with influence and people who are decision makers. I think what we've got to do is to educate those people, and we've got to influence them so that they understand what the needs and requirements of people with various disabilities are. I think it's interesting since 2012. I think 2012, the London Paralympics did the cause of disability rights, if you want to say that, the absolute power of good, because all of a sudden you had a whole stack of people with lots and lots of different disabilities doing these absolutely stupendously phenomenal things that, yes, I knew about because I used to compete in those things, but lots of people didn't know about, and the wider public, and the fact that the venues were sold out and have been sold out at subsequent Paralympics, and people actually watch the stuff on the TV, and they love watching the stuff on the TV, and I think that in itself has helped to start the start the debate. I suppose the debate was going on a long time before that, but to actually really move the debate on. And I think jumping on the back of that, it's really, really important that we do educate, discuss with people and influence them and I suppose get them to overcome their ignorance. And their ignorance isn't their fault, by the way. That isn't their fault. But, you know, we as people with disabilities have got to do something about that. Other people have as well, of course they have. But that's just a comment that I thought I would like to put out there, really.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah. Do the panel want to comment on what Steve said?
Well,
I'll let you go first.
Cool. It's a funny thing, isn't it? The idea of Olympians, disabled Olympians, and this concept of, like, for instance, the film Rain Man. Can you count all these pens as they fall to the floor? That kind of is it savant superpower, they'll call it, and that's it's just okay to not be some kind of super genius autistic person, which is what happens a lot in media.
Yeah, the Rain Man syndrome.
I wanted to highlight the very well done ad campaign showing Paralympians doing Paralympian stuff, but also juxtaposing that with them having in front of a shop with no ramp, say. I don't know if anyone else has seen that advertising campaign. Painter it juxtaposes the superhero aspect with the barriers they face in the community.
Yeah, I've not seen it, but I would echo that if you are a young person interested in sport, in reality being able to find an accessible place and somewhere that will let you play.
And I do agree that it was a watershed, because I visibly noticed an upswing, a change, a start in the conversation.
Yeah.
Particularly Adam Hills.
Oh yeah, on the last leg.
Being prominent on this, but I would say it fits in with that stereotype of being tragic or brave. Achieving the extraordinary, and why are you not achieving the extraordinary too? So in some quarters it's been turned around, as if to say, why aren't X, Y, and Z achieving so much too?
DB, I know you've got something to say.
So, DB says, apart from writing stories, he likes to teach. It has always been his passion to teach. And he likes teaching about disabilities, right? And about people, how to people to walk right.
And I know, a lot of you have been involved in the disability rights campaign, and it's very interesting that the lack of documentation of the disability rights campaign, and I think you're right, Steve, you know, it's educating people, but sometimes it does feel a bit like an uphill task, and there's no unified response, certainly, and within the four nations, they're all very different in their attitudes towards tackling disability. But then just using the tackling disability, what does that actually mean? That's a huge phrase. And Yeah, and Rachel, you're right about, where when they had Here Come the Superheroes, there was a lot of debate amongst para-athletes, para-sports people about what makes them the superheroes. Surely every sports person who is achieving their very best is a superhero by the definition of the fact that they're achieving their very best. What makes somebody with a disability a superhero compared to others?
But also the thing Steve also mentioned was the idea of invisible disabilities, and this idea of you don't look disabled, autism, etc., and compared to, say, a person in a wheelchair user, and I think that's important to kind of mention as well.
Yeah, and I think there is, when you look at what's happening with young people waiting for an autism diagnosis, and there's a lot more understood about autism now, and the fact that it does affect girls as well as boys. There's a lot more knowledge around that, and a lot of those people I know would not necessarily view themselves as being disabled, and it's very hard if you have a hidden disability, I guess, to stand up and fight for disability rights, because people look at you and think, well, because there is that phrase within the disability community, nothing for us without us. And whilst those of us, that have got a very obvious physical disability, but then people with a hidden disability have got every right to be part of that discussion.
And one of the funny things about the history of autism and so forth, I think there's a guy called Tony Atwood, David Atwood, and he didn't realise his own son, and he was the big expert in autism, was autistic until he was 45. So that idea of just because you're an expert in something doesn't mean you can see it that close.
And I mean, the thing with autism, it's, like they say, you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and the same, when people talk about the disabled. So, Rachel, how do you feel about the phrase, the disabled?
Every human is bespoke.
I like that, yeah. So, I think, DB, that's what...
Every human is bespoke.
Yeah, that's what you'd said in your speech, wasn't it, DB? That we are all our own people, and everybody is unique. I'm just having a quick look. So, DB had commented that people with disabilities are seldom covered in the media, and when they feature, they're often negatively stereotyped and not appropriately represented, which also reflects what Steve was saying. And in terms of the Paralympics, I think that did raise the profile of disability sports, and the fact you'd mentioned Adam Hills, and Channel 4 has a mainstream discussion programme hosted by three people with disabilities.
And the fact they put it on prime time as well.
Yeah.
Where everyone can see it, as contrasted with the panel show that ITV recently did, which is on at 10 o'clock at night, for example.
And I think, for those of you that haven't seen the programme called The Last Leg, they discussed various issues, including politics and disability, but it's not like a disability magazine programme. The comedian Rosie Jones, she came up through Last Leg, but they also have a slot called Is It OK to Ask? And I think that's really important in addressing what you were saying, DB, about a lot of people feel uncomfortable around people with disabilities because for a lot of people it's outside of, their everyday lived experience. And personally, I never mind if people ask me things as long as they're polite. Also, there are some very personal things that I wouldn't answer, but I'd rather they knew the facts than just, went away chuntering, well, she's in a wheelchair, how come she's just suddenly stood up? Because because 80% of people in wheelchairs have some ability. And when I say some, I don't mean they're going to be running a marathon or even, walking 50 metres or something. So how do you feel about is it all right to ask? So, Rachel, I'll come back to you in a minute. DB, Rachel, how do you feel about is it all right to ask?
Well, I'd rather people ask than stare. I've always done this thing with little children that if I see them staring, I make them the priority to say, hi, how are you? What's your name? My name's Rachel. Would you like to see my car?
Yeah.
And I allow them to ask those questions. And I answer honestly. I find children a lot more honest and open than adults sometimes. I've worked with children with the chair in the lobby, but and they're quite open and honest and curious. And I think adults lose that. And I think it is important for adults never to lose that curiosity in worriness that they might offend.
And I would agree with you that I don't find that children are a problem. I find it is the adults. But I wonder if things are changing now in that if you do start engaging with children, and because sometimes the parents will drag them away or try and be saying, oh, don't do this. And I would say, no, it's absolutely fine. I don't mind them asking. I'd rather they knew than, the parents say, give them inaccurate information. And maybe in the future, young people, those children will grow up with far more awareness.
Speaking of children, when I was younger, I asked a very inappropriate question, but it was wonderfully received from a disabled person. I said to this guy who was missing a leg, will it grow back? And he said, I hope so, mate.
Yeah, and yes, I've got...
the innocence of a child.
A friend who had a leg amputated, and the jokes that he can get away with telling, and I think where it's up to the individual, and I think he's got a T-shirt that said, "I was left alone for 5 minutes, and look what happened." And
is it okay to ask? It's good to ask questions about disability. People want to share their experiences, their wisdom they've learned, the little things that could help you, gadgets and so forth. But going back to the media thing, I'd like to ask, why is it quite a few stories about autistic people in the media are, this person was a murderer, and they were also autistic? I see that over and over and over again. It's like, do they have to throw that diagnosis in there? And the other thing that really grinds me is I read all these books about relationships of autistic people, and the basic premise is don't date an autistic guy. And that really hurt to read over and over and over again.
Yeah, that is hard. Do people, have you've got to respond? Yeah.
DB said he likes them to ask him. He likes to talk much about himself and let people know how he feels. But he likes them to ask him directly, but not a support worker.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't know, that those of you that go out with support workers, if you find that people will talk to your support workers rather than to you, the person, and somebody else that I know, and I don't know if you have this, Steve, is that they find that when they're out with their partner, is they will talk to their partner because they assume the person who's with them is obviously, and he is completely blind, can't see him, so there's no point looking at him when they talk to him. I don't know, Rachel, do you go out with a support worker?
Yeah.
And do you find people address them rather than you?
No, not really. They did in the beginning, but it's kind of got better in the last few years. I would say that was more of a parental thing. And and partly my parents kind of anticipated that and talked for me out of habit.
And I know, DB, because obviously you communicate using bliss symbols that you point to with your feet, do you find that people just don't have the patience? Or, I mean, do you find that people do talk to you directly?
TB likes people to talk to him directly, not just the wheelchair, and he believes that they should see him as a person and not a wheelchair user or someone just in wheelchair that can't do anything. So if they talk to him directly, he talks back with his bliss board, which he is able to explain and express everything he wanted. So he's much more happy for people to ask him questions directly, rather than assuming he can't do anything, or is just a wheelchair user, or just talk to his support worker directly.
Does anybody in the audience want to share any of their experiences?
I wondered if I could ask a question. Is that okay?
That's okay.
Excellent. Right. So I'm picking up a vibe that there's a distinction going on between disability and illness. And I wondered if each of you might say what that feels like to you. If that's okay?
Yep. I know, GB, you picked up on that when you were saying about doctors trying to fix you and trying to medicalise things, and health professionals going to think we're all unwell because we have a disability, and the hospital point of view is not correct. I know you've got more to add to that. So, Rachel, what would you always say?
CP is the condition, ramps of a disability. CP is my condition, ramps of a disability. So, CP is my illness that I live with day to day, but the thing that disables me and takes my ability away is the lack of ramps, overgrown topiary, bins that are not brought in every day, and basically people being assholes. Am I allowed to say assholes on TV? on BS?
James, what about you?
Yeah, there's a word I'm trying to think of, co-something, where kind of certain conditions often line up when you have a condition. Comorbid. There you go, see, smart. Thank you. The comorbid conditions, so for instance, autism, often you'll have conditions of anxiety, depression, lot of trauma, and it's those kind of things which come to mind. But yeah, distinction between disability and illness, like illness, for instance, you could talk about COVID and how that could, in theory, go away with like long COVID, for instance, the medication they're working on. But when you are born hardwired a certain way, that's more of a disability thing, I think. Does that sound about right? Yeah.
I think you're being very generous, being the chair, but I think it'd be great to hear from you about that as well, because I think it's a really important question. Would you mind commenting on that?
Do you want to go first, Stevie? No. Yeah, I mean, I feel very strongly that there is a difference between disability and being unwell. If I've got flu, I'm ill and I'm unwell. I have multiple sclerosis, which means I have good days and bad days. It's a condition that affects everybody differently, a bit like CP and autism. You know, you've met one person with MS, you've met one person with MS. And talking about comorbidity, yes, there are ways that it impacts on my body, but I don't see myself as being ill, like everybody, I have moments when I am ill. I have moments where my condition may render me paralysed and bedbound, and I'm disabled, but my disability doesn't mean I'm ill, you know. And I think, like everybody here, I want somebody to see me as me, not a disabled person. And sometimes it can be exhausting working hard to prove that you are you, which ties in with what Rachel was saying about being your own worst critic. You know, I fight very hard to prove to myself that I'm still me, I'm still a person, and not to see the disability. When I get up in the morning, my first thought isn't, oh God, I'm disabled. You know, it's part of who I am. But I strongly believe that disability and being well are two different things.
DB believes that everybody is able differently, and it's not about just being disability. He believes that if people thinking that you are unwell and you are disabled is two different things. The outside might be broken, according to its previous presentation, that the outside might be broken, but the inside is able, like it thinks, it do things like everyone else. So it might be able differently, but it's not disabled.
Yeah. And really reflecting on what DB's saying and what Rachel's saying, in terms of the physical barriers, like the bins that are left out, you know, people parking over dropped curbs and all that, ties in with something called the social model of disability that says that it is society that disables people. People aren't disabled. It is the barriers that society place in the way. And I just realised, sorry, there was a lady up there who wanted to respond. You had your hand up, and I'm so sorry I've not come to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Yeah, you saw me nodding ferociously there, because I do agree with your last point. I've agreed with so many points today. I came in a little bit late, I'm really sorry. So forgive me if we've already covered this, or stop me, rather. Sorry, I should have said I'm Faye, and my work, I'm a specialist nurse in palliative care. Recovery and cure is not in the language of the conversations that I have with people by design. But what I do find, and this has been wonderful, by the way, to listen to. Thank you so much. It's so insightful. And I agree that every human is bespoke. I think that's one of the best quotes I've ever heard. I like that. Thank you. I'll take that with me forever. One of the things that I find, and I've heard a couple of words that kind of lean into this, is the use of like battle language. You used the word tackling before, and I come across a lot of people who are using words like fight, battle, and things like, you know, phrases that imply that it's coming back to this kind of heroic element that we spoke about before. And I try very hard, and I know not every aspect of healthcare is like this, but I try very hard to focus on what is quality and what is compassion. And there is so much of that in the discussion that you've had, the debate that you've had. But you are absolutely right in, you know, talking about people as people. Everybody has different quality measures. And it's frightening how much there is this consideration of normal and cured and ill and all these things. And I just think that a good place to start for everybody in society, and this is also echoing back into what you see in the media, is the language, the words that we use. I don't know if you spoke about that earlier on today, and I've missed that. No, okay, good. Not going over stuff again. But yeah, the words that we use, and just for everybody to just be considerate about simply the words that we use, like saying for me, I try as much as I can to use the word person and people. I try not to use the word patient, even though technically and officially that's what a lot of the people I meet are in relationship to me. But I want them to know that I see a person, not a patient. And I discourage people a lot, in a gentle way, from using language of sort of fighting and battling. But yeah, I thank you for the bespoke soundbite, if you like, because I will take that with me.
It reminds me that disability is not a dirty word. I'm strange in the sense that I will overtly tell people I am autistic on my books, but in person I won't, because I've had people talk to me like I'm a 10-year-old the second I do. Their tone changes, their attitude changes. I am disregarding the second, the moment I say I am autistic. I've had people call me slurs as I'm skateboarding past them in the shop outside Chapel FM, as if they have any right to call me a retard. And yeah, so that's kind of what's on my mind.
Which I think ties in with what you were saying about battle. And whilst I don't wake up every day saying, oh God, I'm disabled, I must admit there are a lot of situations where even before I've got there, I see a battle, get in the bus. Will the bus driver stop for me because if they don't want to let the ramp down? Will they let the ramp down? What's the attitude going to be? And then when you reverse into the space, and I don't know if you guys have had this, I mean, I'm in a power chair, so I manoeuvre myself, and when you've reversed into the space and I feel like I'm on Strictly or something and they're all holding up scorecards and, oh, haven't you done well? Oh, you're good at that, aren't you? And there are situations actually that I avoid because I know it is too stressful to go in there in a wheelchair, and it is a battle. And I don't know, what other people. I mean, you must obviously, James. You said you feel stressed, and then Rachel and Debbie. Rachel, what are your feelings?
Well, I want to hear more from James's point of view because he has the unique option of going incognito, as it were. He has that choice. So to self-disclose is actually a very brave thing to do. And I cringe at the word brave again.
Yeah, there are times when I honestly have gone undercover to autism discussion events, and then this, I don't know, what's the word? Child infantilization, is that the word? That happens the second I say in the audience, and then they all change. Yeah. Oh, there's one here. Yeah.
And in regards to what you were saying about love and relationships, I think that is the place where the next steps are going to be headed, because there's a level of uncomfortability around intimate relationships and depictions of such.
Well, the Channel 4, The Undateables. Not that I've ever watched it. I've just seen the title and cringe. It might be a very good programme. I don't know. I've not watched it.
There is also the topic of losing your disability benefits because you got married. You have to choose between love and the financial support you need.
If you shouldn't, you might lose some, but if you have it shouldn't make any difference if you're in a relationship. So I'm just waiting for DB. And the person who was talking about, it's interesting that you're working with people, palliative care, but I don't know how many other people, if you've been to the doctors with something, and they'll just blame you on your condition. And actually, it's nothing to do with your condition. My back hurts because I fell over. It's not because I have MS or, whatever. Or my hips hurt, not because I'm sat in the wheelchair. there's a genuine pain. I don't know, do any of you have that?
Well, I do think when it comes to a point... Sorry.
Says each day he give up because he don't want to say that, like he don't want to say oh.
Sorry, so...
He said each day he gives up because he don't want to face all the criticism and boss and everything.
Yeah, which is, I guess, one of the other things, almost in a way, it's going back to when people with disabilities were hidden away and locked in institutions. There's still an awful lot of people with disabilities who just can't face the stress of going out. And until you see more people with disabilities out there in the workplace and going about their normal everyday lives, things won't change. But it is hard when there are so many barriers in your way.
To pick up on what you were saying, James, earlier, I think in terms of the crime and the autism thing, I think that might be mitigating circumstances or an attempt to mitigate circumstances for lack of empathy.
Yeah. Tony, can I let Deepin fly and then we'll go to you.
So he said that's happened in the past and it's still happening again. So that's why he gave up and each day just wants to face all those challenges.
Yeah, and I think, you're not alone in that situation.
Raya.
I was just going to ask if you can talk about the benefits of having people with disabilities in the workplace, having a diverse workplace. My partner's blind, and he always gives an anecdote about when he applied to become an accountant, and all these different firms were rejecting him. And then one firm finally was honest with him and said, well, we don't know how you can do it. We don't believe you as a blind man can do this job. And so for the next interview, he stopped them and said, just before I start, can I just tell you a bit about my blindness and how I can do this job? And then from that point, he was getting job offers left, right and centre. And within that workplace, it was back in the 90s, everything was paper-led. He said, can I put all this stuff electronically on a computer? And they said no. He decided to do it anyway, and he ended up doing a job that would take a sighted person 4 weeks in 4 days, because he put it on Excel and he whizzed it, got through it very quickly. So I guess the question is about kind of how people with disabilities find different ways of doing things, and that actually does benefit often a workplace. So yeah, just a question on that really.
Yeah, I think the big question is when you apply for a job, and a lot of the time they have the form for you to fill in to declare whether or not you're disabled. Do you complete that and trust that it won't be opened by the people who are interviewing you until after the interview? Or do you lie on it to get the job? So James first, have you had experience of this?
Yeah, I've been told by the DWP, do not put you are disabled on your CV, on your applications. They don't want that. And but yeah, the value of having a person with disabilities in organisations is numerous. The empathy, the understanding, the dynamic skills they could have that people have just disregarded because of a label. Yeah, I think that's what comes to mind.
Rachel?
Well, I volunteer as a community organiser, so of course the broader cross-section of society is represented in community organising. The broader the campaign's tackled, the more voices are heard and the deeper the experience. I recently spoke at a symposium for disabled women, and a lot of those organisations were BAME as well. So you had cross-sectionality, intersectionality, and the resultant experiences deepened and enriched the experience and the base of knowledge. So that can only be enhanced. What is the harm of more knowledge and more enriched experience to draw from?
DP, have you got... I'll come back to you in a moment. I've had to retire through ill health, but I was very lucky that my former employer was absolutely fantastic. And I think you're right. I think the workplace should be as diverse as possible. And all the statistics tend to show that people with a disability take far fewer sick days because they're so conscious of being, disabled, that any little slip-up is going to be a judgment against them. And I think it's valuable for people, in society to have as broad a mix as possible. So in schools, whilst some children have needs where they benefit from being in a special school, there are a lot of kids that don't. And I think the more you've got mixing in society of people with disabilities, it can only be good. And, initially people might be uncomfortable about the fact that you're a wheelchair user, but eventually they start to see you as you, and you're part of the team. And I was very lucky as well that access for work at that time were extremely helpful in enabling me to stay in work longer. And I was very lucky, but I had applied for another job and I'd ticked the disability form, and I know that they had read that, and I didn't get an interview. And interestingly, I applied to the same company several years later, and I didn't complete the disability, and I got offered the job, but I turned it down. So no, I think people with disabilities should be seen everywhere.
David says he likes to walk, but he doesn't have documents and is unable to read words. So he's not being given the chance to walk.
Yeah. And I think, and again, I haven't got the figures to hand, but Scope produced the statistics of the number of people with disabilities that want to work. And when the media portray people with disabilities as, being slackers and, we want to get more people into work, that's fine. But finding somebody that will employ you, and as soon as they hear the word reasonable adjustments, leap to all sorts of conclusions. Oh my goodness, they're a wheelchair user. Oh my goodness, they're blind. We're going to have to do this, that and the other. Whereas in reality, they might not have to do anything very much at all.
I think we've just got time for one more question, if that's all right, and then I'm afraid we might have to wind up. I'm sorry about that.
Follow-up.
Hello, my name's Emmy. You mentioned a few minutes ago about the application process for jobs and saying about, do you say yes, you're disabled, or do you lie? And my question is, why isn't there one of those boxes that says rather not say, like you get with everything else? They're not allowed to ask about gender, they're not supposed to ask about age. Lots of places are supposed to ask about your current situation regarding money. So why is it okay for them to ask you about a disability before they've even met you?
I mean, I know it's a tick tick box exercise, which is why they do sometimes still ask your ethnicity and your sex, although interestingly now a lot of the time they do prefer not to say. But you're right, you know, why is it relevant? I mean, what do you all think?
Going back to the early question, because I've just thought of it, there was a very, very clever disabled artist called Jill Clancy-Orr that did a show about the history of disabled mill workers, and the fact they popularised BSL, or the beginnings of BSL, in the mill floor at large as a way to communicate.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think some of you may know Jill Crawshaw. She's been involved in the chapel, and her exhibition at Armley was excellent. Yes, focusing on disabled mill workers, and I know she's done a lot of research on it. Sadly, I think we're out of time, Peter.
I think we'll have to close quite soon.
We might have to do a part 2.
We have to part 2.
I mean, to be
part 2.
honest, this has all come from the first question, and there are another 4 questions, really. So, you know, and what I really love, like I say, is I think it's the first time that I've ever been aware of, you know, a panel made up of people with different disabilities, different, you know, lived experiences, talking about disability. You know, it's a prime example of nothing for us without us.
Well, on that, I'd really like, unless anybody else has got anything to add, I just want to thank you, all 4 of you, and also the audience here for your perceptive questions. So, and just before we thank these people, I just want to, they've been very modest, but Rachel, whose idea this programme was at the start, is a fantastic poet. You'll see her poetry on the recovery chair downstairs in the corner, which you can sit on and get inspired in. So James Lewis Moran has got, how many books?
Almost 8.
8 poetry books, which you can probably find in the library downstairs. DB's written an autobiography and is writing another book, as far as I know, and is also a songwriter. Wrote the last song in the set, which I found very powerful. We saw downstairs. And Vicky is a storyteller who you've told so many stories on this radio station. They're all on our website. So all very talented and productive people. So thank you so much for taking part this afternoon. Please give them a round of applause.
The road to hell is paved with adverbs. So said Stephen King.